And welcome to the Science, Innovation and Technology Select Committee, and this our fourth and final session on our inquiry into social media, misinformation and harmful algorithms. And I'd also like to particularly welcome Paul Waugh, who is joining us from the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, guesting, as we say. But my particularly warm welcome to our two panellists here today, for John Edwards, the Information Commissioner, and Mark Bunting, the Director of Online Safety Strategy Delivery at Ofcom. Mark and I should declare that Mark and I worked together many years ago at Ofcom, before I was a Member of Parliament, and since then Mark has worked elsewhere and is now back at Ofcom. But this is a question to both of you, but I will particularly I'll start with Mark, because when I worked at Ofcom, BT, who was our biggest sort of regulated entity, they had a market capitalisation of about £10 billion, and Ofcom's budget was £140 million. And now, from what I can calculate, Ofcom and the ICO's combined budget is about £300 million. But we have, you are regulating absolute giants such as Facebook, such as Meta and Google, with market capitalizations of $1.3 trillion and $1.9 trillion respectively. Now, we often felt outgunned by the big players. How do Ofcom and the ICO manage their resource imbalance with big tech? And I'll start with Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to the committee today. It's a very good question. And to add to the challenge slightly, of course, we're at the start of a journey of regulating firms that have only recently been regulated in this way. The UK is one of the earliest, and I think it is the most comprehensive set of rules regarding online safety in the world. Other regimes are in place already, but all of these have emerged in the last few years. So we're in the early phases of what will be a lengthy journey of transforming the accountability of tech firms for the safety of their users. You asked about our resources, Chair. What I would say is that we have particularly invested in developing the relationships with the biggest firms that you mentioned, as well as some of the smaller and riskier firms. We've developed a technology team. It's about 40 people strong. We have about 70 people in our supervision unit. We have a dedicated enforcement team, a dedicated legal team supporting the regime. The great advantage that I think we've got is two things, really. Firstly, the legislation is very clear about what it expects companies to do, and it also has empowered us to set out more detail about what is required by companies to keep their users safe, and very extensive powers to request information from them to check whether they're doing the job effectively. And the other advantage is that we are part of a much broader regulatory environment, including close working with the ICO, but also with our international counterparts, who very often are engaged in work to try to achieve the same outcomes as us. So I don't think we're under any illusions about the scale of the challenge. It's a challenge for industry in the first instance, who have to demonstrate that they're taking user safety more seriously than they have done in the past. But we do feel confident that we've got the resources that we need to make a difference.
Thank you very much, Mark Bunting. And we'll come back, I think, to questions of clarity and of the legislation and engagement with the big tech companies. But John Edwards, what is your view on the disparity in both in resources and between yourselves and the big tech companies?
Thank you. It's a very real issue, and it's even more pronounced, I think, with the ICO, because we are a whole economy regulator, not just a sectoral regulator. So we have responsibility for any transaction involving personal data with a controller or a processor, wherever that be in the economy. That includes schools, GPs, pharmacies, hairdressers, as well as the large international platforms that you mentioned. So we have to be very selective about where we intervene. We act on a spectrum, I think. My regulatory philosophy is informed by, I think, a truism that the single most important determinant of compliance with regulation is ease of compliance. So we put quite a lot of emphasis on providing clarity to businesses, including big tech firms, which we sometimes, I think, make the mistake of assuming that with all those trillions of dollars, they are right across all the regulatory regimes of the different jurisdictions in which they operate, and it ain't necessarily so. So we need to set our expectations. We do that in guidance, we do that in policy statements. We, like Ofcom, engage with the platforms, and I think I'll have the opportunity later in the session to explain some of the impact that we've had with that engagement with those platforms, and then to deploy our enforcement tools and investigative tools in a way which we hope can get the greatest impact. But I think the underlying assumption of your question is correct, that if we were to have a very aggressive investigative and enforcement approach with those platforms, chasing after every passing car, we would be tied up in litigation and, in fact, not be able to achieve anything.
And are you concerned about their litigative capabilities? We have heard concerns expressed that both Ofcom and ICO are reluctant to take on the big tech companies because of their ability to call for judicial review, etc. Are you concerned?
No, I mean, we have a rules-based society. As a statutory organisation, I'm accountable to the Parliament and to the courts. Organisations in respect of which we intervene are entitled to avail themselves of all the legal remedies that the legal system presents. So that's just our operating environment, and I won't complain about it. I think there are examples where parts of the system impede our ability to intervene in a timely way, and I can give some examples of that if it would be of interest to the committee.
Briefly, could you?
Sure. One of the first actions I took when I became Commissioner in 2022 was to confirm a notice of intention to find Clearview AI for its processing of data of UK citizens. Yes. And I issued a fine of £7 million. Clearview appealed that, as it is entitled to do to the first-tier tribunal. The matter was decided on a point of law that we thought warranted further exploration, so we lodged a notice of applying for leave to appeal. It took the tribunal 1 year to consider that application for leave. We have not yet got a hearing date for that appeal. If we succeed in the appeal, it may be remitted back to the tribunal for a further hearing. It is very unlikely that in my 5-year term I will see that matter concluded.
Right. It's a very interesting example. Can I just... I'll come to you, Kit, in a moment. You've both talked about engaging with the big tech companies. I know, Mark Bunting, that organisations have tried to get a list of that engagement, which companies you're meeting, how much time you've spent with them, through freedom of information and other means. Are you committed to... can I ask why you have been reluctant to share that information, and are you committed to transparency when it comes to engaging with tech companies?
I think we're committed to transparency about, committed to transparency about the impact that we think regulation is having and the problems that we're trying to address. I don't think, as a general rule, it is advisable for us to give a running commentary on conversations with individual companies. That can make it
for a running commentary, just to know who you're meeting when.
We're still working through how we share with stakeholders the work in progress that we're doing. Completely understand the interest in seeing that, and of course it's particularly important to us that we get the insight from civil society organisations and other expert bodies to inform that process, so that we have the best possible evidence to engage the companies that we're talking to. finding the right way of doing that without revealing details of confidential conversations or putting out statements that are so bland that they don't really add much value is something that we're still working through.
Well, perhaps you could write to us to say why you are not able to say what companies you have met.
Do that.
Kit Belthouse, did you want to come in here?
Obviously, the firepower that these organisations deploy is not just in terms of litigation or their engagement with you. It's also in terms of their the PR battle that they fight, both with politicians and online. And given that they control much of the perception of the British people, and therefore in these kind of often battles that are straying into politics, they have an influence there. Do you monitor that activity, and does it concern you? So, for example, if government ministers or other politicians are receiving hospitality or having meetings with these organisations, and that's influencing then future policy, or indeed their discussions with you, the ministers' discussions with you, is that monitored, registered, and of concern?
We monitor what companies say about the things that we're responsible for holding them to account for. And in that area, we're extremely interested in their public statements, and we follow them very closely. We will always want to see that the things that they're saying in public are matched up by real action behind the scenes. Equally, where they want to make changes to the policies that they have in place, we'll want to ensure that they're doing that in a way which is compliant with the rules that we've set out for them. We've got a very clear brief, we feel, in the legislation. Of course, we have very good ongoing discussions with government about any changes they might make, but we're an independent regulator. And
that's not really what I'm asking. I'm asking, do you feel that the atmosphere in which you're operating is influenced by the influence they exert through their vast resources on your other counterparties, such as government?
We don't, I would say. I mean, look, the strongest pressure that we feel, and we welcome it, and it's partly why we've got this job, is the overwhelming public demand for something to be done to improve user safety online. We're very conscious of that. You know, that is a daily topic of conversation in the media, as it should be. And we feel a great responsibility to respond to that. I don't see companies resisting the broad principles of that in terms of the protection of children and the protection of all users from illegal content online. But the strongest pressure that we feel is to hold companies to account for responding to that.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I mean, I guess, just to finish, I mean, what these companies say and what they do are two very different things, certainly in my experience, and I think in the experience of lots of parents. So I'm not sure I necessarily take that word. I guess the point I'm making is asking, which it's hard to get an answer. Maybe John, you could help.
Yes, I can.
They are deploying millions and millions and millions of pounds in trying to condition the atmosphere in which you operate, both politically and societally. Right now, in other spheres, in other industries like life sciences, for example, big pharma, there have been big restrictions on what they're able to do, right, for exactly that reason. Is that a difficulty for either of you?
Not for me, not for the ICO, not in the slightest. We are charged, I have a statutory obligation to act independently, to apply the law that Parliament has provided. And I do that without, I don't care what they're saying to politicians. Now, if one of these platforms goes into the Secretary of State or the Minister or comes into this place and argues for a law that reflects their preferences for an operating environment, that's your job to inquire about the costs of that and the implications of that. I apply the law that you have already provided, and I do that without reference to the preferences for an operating environment.
I think we get
just a final question. But if there is legislative change that's proposed, you would necessarily have a view on that legislation and whether you think that's going to be damaging to your wider mission or not. So, for example, we just had a private member's bill that was seeking to protect children online, which the government effectively vetoed, filleted, gutted, whatever, to enormous disappointment for lots of people. There is a suspicion, I asked the question in the House, that that action by them was part of a wider negotiation with the United States, who are themselves under the influence of these vast companies, seeking to protect a very lucrative part of their market.
Kate, I don't think we can ask them to comment on international trading environment. To comment on the international trading environment. We'll put those questions to the Minister when she comes in.
But you're allowed. I'm asking a question about forming a judgment on proposed legislation or legislation that doesn't come forward.
What I can say is that we've been really clear throughout this process. It's government and Parliament's job to set the policy and to work out what it wants to achieve. It's our job to help make that happen, including by advising government on Parliament on what we think good regulation looks like. It's not for us to get involved in political debates, and I completely agree with what John said. Those political debates don't affect the day-to-day doing of the job that Parliament has given us in the slightest.
So let us move on to what is certainly within your remit, Mark Bunting. And thank you, Kit. I know what you're trying to get at, but I think we should leave those questions to the Minister later. So the tech platforms, we did do our job in inquiring, and we brought the tech platforms in to see us. And in the context that this inquiry was in the wake of the Southport riots and a sense that the Online Safety Act should play a role in ensuring that something like that did not happen again. The tech platforms told us that even if the Act had been fully implemented, it would have done nothing to change their response. So doesn't this say that the Online Safety Act is not fit for purpose?
Well, we wrote to the Secretary of State last autumn to set out our assessment of what happened during those terrible days after the attack. I think we were very clear there that we thought there were a number of questions that the tech firms would have had to answer had the duties been in force when those events took place, including whether they'd carried out an adequate risk assessment of the events of last August, and whether they had appropriate crisis response processes in place and whether they deployed them effectively. Now, I don't want to go back and sort of legislate events that happened before the duties were in force, but I think I can say that we don't think that companies are sufficiently consistently or effectively responding to events of this kind. And as the committee will probably be aware, we're working now on proposals for further measures in our codes of practice for companies to implement crisis response protocols specifically in response to the events of last summer. And we'll expect companies to be doing a lot more and to be able to be much more accountable for their response than they have been in the past.
I would say, Mark, I find that kind of hard to accept, given that you yourself just earlier have said that the role of the Online Safety Act was to protect children from harm and the public from illegal content. And the Online Safety Act does not designate misinformation as illegal content. Neither the Online Safety Act nor any of Ofcom's codes include misinformation as a harm that needs to be addressed by online services. So that means that the platforms, even if they identify it in their risk assessment, they have no duties to comply with. So isn't this a safe harbour for platforms?
So the thing that concerned us in the evidence that we gathered about the events of last summer was that a lot of the content that was circulating was illegal. It included threats of violence, threats and harassment of religious and ethnic groups, calls for violent protests. Those are all serious offences under UK law, and that is the area where our forensic analysis will be targeted should, and let's hope it doesn't, but should anything similar happen again. You're right, that of course, that the previous government made a decision to remove legal material that might be harmful to adults from the scope of the Act, including other forms of misinformation. We are still working in that area. The committee might be aware that we announced the membership of our Information Advisory Committee yesterday, and they'll be there
we will come to that.
To advise us.
Before we move on, just to be clear on this, because misinformation, the examples you give of illegal content are incredibly concerning, and they were part in the Southport riots, but it was actually the misinformation that the perpetrator of this heinous act was a Muslim immigrant, which was a huge driver of the response to those terrible murders. And you are saying, I think you're saying, that the Online Safety Act does not deal with that, and you do not expect it to deal with that, and you feel that that is clear.
That's correct, with one small caveat, which is that the Act did introduce a new offence of false communications with an intent to cause harm. And where companies have reasonable grounds to infer that there is intent to cause harm, I'm not saying that's a...
Smiling because somebody was charged with that
yes.
that offence, and they were found not guilty on the basis that intent is very difficult to prove.
Well, what I would say about that is that it's a new law, there is not much case law, and therefore we recognise that this is limited in our ability to get traction on the type of material that you're talking about.
Would you like to see clarity on that?
Well, I think that's a matter of government and Parliament.
Right, okay. So as far as you're concerned, it's very clear that the Online Safety Act does not cover misinformation. And on that basis, I'll move on to Adam.
Thank you, Chair. And good morning, both. Thank you for coming down. I'm interested, a couple of questions for you, particularly, Mark, focusing on the concept of safety by design. Do you think the Online Safety Act has fulfilled its goal of ensuring safety by design on various platforms?
We do think that safety by design is right at the heart of the Act. That is a term that's used in different ways by different people, but we understand it to mean the proactive consideration of safety throughout a company's governance and throughout its product design and engineering processes. And we have tried to build that thinking into the guidance that we provided about how to do good risk assessments and into the measures of our codes of practice about the governance arrangements that firms have to have. Those are not complete pictures. The first sets of codes that we've produced we see as foundations that we'll build on over time. We have included some measures there about specific areas of design that we want companies to look at very closely, particularly the design of their recommender algorithms, and that may be something the committee wants to come back to. But we think there's more to be done. Another area that we will be publishing more proposed codes of practice measures in the next few months is the use of AI tools to proactively identify harmful content so that it can be blocked before it's uploaded to a service. So we think there's more to be done. We do think the foundations are in place, and we do think it's an act which is about safety by design, although I recognise there is still ongoing work and discussion for us to have with stakeholders about the specifics of that.
I wonder if I can make a contribution, Madam Chair.
Of course.
Sorry, I wonder if I might just respond to that as well, because I mean, safety by design is also at the core of the Age-Appropriate Design Code, which is a code of practice issued under the Data Protection Act, and it describes our expectations, the ICO's expectations, in terms of platforms designed for to be accessed by children. As a result of that code, it's got 15 sort of privacy by design principles, but they include things like turning off geolocation by default, switching off an ability to message young people by default, switching settings to private by default. So all of these are expectations of the design standards for platforms that are accessible by children. And we've been able to achieve a lot of change in the services that are offered to children through that code.
Just on that, just briefly, unlike the age verification code, though, John, the Online Safety Act and the guidance defines safety as safety from illegal content, is my understanding, rather than from harmful content. Is that right?
Illegal content and content that's harmful to children.
So again, misinformation is not covered by the safety by design.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I thank you both for those answers. It's segued very nicely into the next question that I had for you, actually. So you've talked about the codes of practice that you've put together already and actually accepted already that there is more work to be done there. I think there's been something of a focus on reactive measures in the first draft of the codes of practice, and you've talked about moving towards a more proactive model. Do you think that, firstly, the reactive focus maybe doesn't necessarily address true safety by design? And maybe could you elaborate on the future direction of where you see those going in future?
Yeah, as I say, I mean, the Online Safety Act really has the two components. There's the codes of practice, which serve a particular function to signal to every company that's in scope of these laws what the simple steps are they can take to comply. And then there's the wider risk management and governance processes that the Act puts in place. We think that it's probably no firm which is fully compliant with either of those parts of the regime, but I'm particularly concerned about the processes for risk management and that proactive identification of risk. The immediate focus for us there is really understanding how, for these firms, particularly the biggest firms and the firms that pose particular risk, how they are embedding safety by design thinking in their risk management processes. That's something that we're going to learn more about over time. We've just completed our first trawl of illegal harms risk assessments, and we received around 60 by the end of March. We're analysing those now, and that I think will tell us a lot more. We will learn things from that we'll want to use to improve our guidance over time. So yes, more on risk management, more on good governance, more understanding of what it really takes to embed safety into product design, and more focus on particular types of design feature where we think that there are risks that could be more effectively managed proactively. I've mentioned the AI tools for content detection one. Another area where we'll be making more proposals shortly is on live streaming, where we heard feedback from our first consultation. This was an area where we'd identified risks, but stakeholders felt that our measures didn't go far enough to deal with those risks. We've heard that feedback, and we're bringing forward further proposals now to make live streaming safer, particularly for children. So, yeah, we think strong foundation, but more to do for sure.
Okay, thanks, Mark. That is reassuring. A couple of quite specific questions moving forward as you go on to the next draft of these codes of practice. Do you think there's some scope to impose duties on platforms to demote or de-amplify harmful content through their algorithms?
I think there is, and John will want to comment on this because the ICO has been doing some very useful work on design of recommender systems too. We think this is an extremely important area. We know, now very familiar, but our evidence has shown over a number of years, the role that algorithms can play in reinforcing harmful content, particularly for children, and surfacing harmful content to children who may not have gone out and searched for it. There's two different problems there that the algorithms are involved with. The measures that we've included in our codes of practice expect firms to do much more to be testing those algorithms for what may be unintended outcomes, but they need to do much more to test whether the algorithms are having those unintended effects, and particularly for children, to remove harmful content from feeds so that those effects are negated.
On that point specifically, why doesn't the recently published Code of Practice include misinformation and disinformation as harmful content that should be excluded or demoted?
Well, it's the same reason that we discussed earlier. The Act specifies the types of content that are harmful to children. The focus in the Act is on pornography, suicide, self-harm content, eating disorder content. There is a range of other forms of content, including violence, that are covered by the Act. Misinformation, disinformation can be covered by that to the extent that, for example, they amount to harassment or abuse. That would be captured by the Act. But there is no general provision in the Act for misinformation to be captured as a harm to children. The one area where we have extended it is in the area of content, depressive content, or content which can again be misinformation, which we've identified through our work. Does have discernible impacts on children, very extensive evidence base of that now, but we don't think the Act would give us sufficient flexibility to address disinformation in its entirety.
Would you like to see that covered in future?
Well, look, I think it is a matter for government and Parliament. I know that's a frustrating answer, but it is a matter for
You're
government and Parliament.
You're going to hear a lot of that.
Look, I mean, I think we're still in the early stages of this process of working out the effects of social media and consumption of this type of material on children. There's been lots of research now, but the debate is still ongoing about what's a safe media environment for children online. I think I could go in a number of directions. All sorts of proposals have been made, and it's not for us to comment on specific answers, but we do support that ongoing debate about what more needs to be done, and I don't think we would say that the Online Safety Act is the end of that journey.
Very good.
Thank you, Adam. I have a lot of interest, obviously, in protecting children, but before we move on, I'll ask Emily to come in briefly.
So I'm a mum. So I'm speaking both as a member of this committee and as a parent, and I think the question that parents really want to know is two questions, really. First one, we talked about illegal activity. I think we can all agree that the online grooming gangs against children, we know that's increased by 89% in the last 6 years. 81% of that is against young girls. So the offences have reached 7,000. Now that's just the ones we know about, but this is the fear of every parent of children online. So what exactly does the ICO do, and will Ofcom do with these new powers to actually protect our children from online grooming? Just precisely, not generally. What actual actions are you going to take?
Thank you. So I briefly mentioned the age-appropriate design code and its design principles. One of those is that children should not be able to be contacted by people who are not on their contacts list, who are not approved by default. So adults shouldn't be able to cold call children, whether that be on video streaming or gaming or social media platforms. And we have been working with platforms to enforce that, and many of them have changed their default settings as a result. If we find...
Still going up? How is it still going up if we have this? So what actions are we taking to actually make sure it's going down?
I'm not aware of the platforms that you're describing.
48% of that happens on Snapchat, 12% on WhatsApp, 10% on Facebook, 6% on Instagram. So of that, 28% is on Meta platforms. What are we doing with Meta to make sure that those numbers are going in the other direction? What are we doing with Snapchat? Have we met them? Are we prosecuting them? What are we doing to actually bring those numbers down?
Well, we do meet with these platforms often. We've had commitments from platforms to turn off personalised advertising, to stop default geolocation being available to other users, and, as I said, to stop strangers from contacting them. And I think that's a key thing for preventing grooming. I can't give you details about our specific interactions with the platforms on that particular issue, but I'm happy to commit to going back to my teams and finding out whether we have extant investigations or enforcement action in relation to those, or whether we have seen non-compliance that we've drawn to the attention of the platforms.
Okay. And turning to Mark and the role of Ofcom in this, and I'd like to expand it further to adolescence has absolutely been something that has captured the nation, certainly captured every single parent who's worried about that radicalisation online in misogyny for our young men and boys. Is this considered misinformation? Is this considered illegal content? What actions are you doing so that the young men and the young girl that we saw portrayed in that docudrama, that I appreciate is not a true story, but it's very close to many, many stories we've seen repeat in every school across this country. What specific actions are Ofcom doing to tackle this kind of radicalisation of young men that are putting our young women at risk and their futures at risk?
Yeah, well, look, I completely agree with what you say, and I think adolescence is one of those dramas that succeeded in capturing the nature of a problem in a way that can be difficult for regulators with our sort of dry research. to do so vividly. I think, unfortunately, it does reflect the experience that we know a lot, not all by any means, but a lot of younger people have today. You asked what are we specifically doing in that area. So there's a few things. Firstly, some of that material would be captured by the categories of content that are covered by the Act. Misogynistic abuse, for example, bullying are captured by the Act. Content that stirs up hatred towards women would be captured by the Act. That gives us a strong platform to talk to companies about what they're doing about some forms of misogynistic abuse and gender-based harm. It doesn't capture all forms of misinformation. I think we've discussed that already. The one thing that additionally we've done in this area, and Parliament gave us a clear mandate to do this, is to produce additional guidance specifically on protecting women and girls online. We published that in draft form in February. That includes all of the things that companies have to do in order to comply with the existing rules, but it also sets out good practice guidance. It's a very extensive set of recommendations for firms about how they act on this type of abuse. That's a challenge to industry. We're consulting on that. We're looking for them to come back to us with meaningful responses, and we'll have more to say about that later in the year.
Okay. I think what I'm concerned about, and I think what parents will be concerned about, is there's no action. I appreciate what you're saying, yes. Guidance, and we're talking to them, but what are we actually doing to stop it? And I guess the really specific question then is, do you have the power to stop it? Yes or no? I'm not asking whether you should or shouldn't, because you're right, that's up to politicians. Do you have the power to take action against these companies to stop the online grooming and to stop the spread of misogyny and the radicalisation of our young men online? Do you have that power?
What we have the power to do, I'm sure John will want to comment on this as well, what we have the power to do is to make sure that companies have good systems in place to identify those risks when they're occurring and take action against them.
Yes or no?
But what does good mean?
Yeah.
50% gets through? 20% gets through? What is good?
That's not the standard that the Act asks us to assess. The Act asks us to ensure that companies have robust processes for dealing with this.
I think there's a lack of a definition of what is success. John, do you want to briefly...
Thank you. I think it's really important that we explain the nexus between ICO and Ofcom here. The committee has an understandable expectation that Ofcom is there to look at the kind of content, the sort of things that you're concerned about, Ms. Darlington, what that child, what that young person sees. And that is Ofcom's remit under the Online Safety Act. My remit at the ICO is data use in ways which cause harm. Now, behind every post that goes to a child is an algorithm which is fed on what the platform already knows about that child from their biography, what it knows about them from what they've looked at before, how long they've looked at it, what they've clicked like on, what they've shared. These are data uses. And I have announced an investigation into recommender systems and the way in which data is used to put content onto the screen. Now, we need to be working very closely with Ofcom in that. But the data protection laws in this country create obligations on controllers to process data in ways that are fair. Now, I don't think it's a huge leap for anyone to say that if a child of 13 or 14 is being radicalized by what they see, and what they see as a result of how their data is used, then that is a harm. That is unfair. I don't think it's a huge leap to say if a child is being induced to spend unhealthy amounts of time on a platform or on a device, that is an unfairness. They are competing in an asymmetrical environment where cognitive frailties and immaturities are being exploited. So we are very keen to explore the limits of data protection law to create standards. Now, one of the complexities about this is the kinds of data uses that I'm describing which can cause harm also have a significant role in keeping children safe. Mm-hmm. You cannot moderate the content through an algorithm unless you know some of those things about children. So what we have committed to do is to open the box and to hold companies to account to ensure that those data processing activities are transparent, to ensure that they have done the kind of risk assessments that we would expect, to ensure that mitigations are in place to prevent the kinds of harms that you are describing.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily, for that very important intervention. And thank you, John Edwards, for what you've just said. Could we ask you to write to us with your thoughts on the roles of data controllers, particularly in mitigating misinformation?
Yes, certainly.
I think that's what we're talking about. Now, Steve, over to you.
Great, thank you, Chair. Just some questions for Mark, really, on the Online Safety Act, and particularly just going back to mis and disinformation. Ofcom are committed to creating the Misinformation Disinformation Advisory Committee by the end of 2024. Note that maybe good timing for your appearance today. It was formally announced yesterday with a changed name. Could you talk to us about the reasons why it's taken so long to set up, about 4 months late, and then the reason for the changed name as well, please?
Yes, absolutely. Well, we appointed the chair and started the process of recruiting members by the end of last year. That has taken a little bit longer to find the right mix of people than we'd expected. But Richard Allen has been in place for a number of months and has been starting to do the work to prepare the plans for the committee. The first formal committee meeting will be in May, very shortly, and they'll be developing a programme of work which, this is for Richard in his independent capacity to lead on, but I'm sure he'd be very happy to share more information about that plan of work with the committee as it develops. The change in name, not particularly significant. I mean, the feedback that we had during the recruitment process was that mis and disinformation did not describe the totality of what people thought the committee had been asked to do. The committee has been charged with advising Ofcom on its responsibilities, particularly in areas like transparency. As we discussed earlier, mis and disinformation are very wide concepts. Lord Allen is particularly keen to ensure that the committee's advice is useful for Ofcom in the work that it's doing to keep users safe from the harms that are identified in the legislation. The change in name is really simply to reflect that the focus will be broadly on online information, which may include sometimes content which is not mis and disinformation, but is nonetheless relevant to the things that the committee's been charged with looking at. So, plus from a very practical point of view, it avoids us having to say mis and disinformation every time we have to describe what the committee's doing, which may sound like a trivial thing, but it's a bit easy. So it doesn't change anything about the terms of reference for the committee that we set out towards the end of last year. It doesn't change anything about the statutory function of the committee. It's a change in name, nothing more.
Can you tell me what the challenges were to recruiting members to the committee?
Well, I haven't been very close to that process myself. We were, of course, keen. In fact, we were required by the Act to achieve a mix of different types of people. They needed to be experts in the field. They also needed to have a mix of people who represented the interests of the public and represented the interests of industry. At the same time, we felt it was important, and Richard felt it was important in doing that recruitment, that he was recruiting independent voices who would not be representatives of any particular perspective or give the impression that people would have the opportunity to lobby Ofcom in pursuit of their own particular interests. And getting that blend of people exactly right inevitably is complex. I think we have got a really good lineup for the committee now. Looking forward to working with them very closely. It has taken a little bit longer than expected, but we think we've got a really good committee lined up now.
Is it the committee you wanted, or did a lot of people decline to participate?
I'm not close enough to the process to answer that question, I'm afraid.
Just back to the name change, it's one of the few measures to tackle misinformation was this committee, and sort of feels like, you know, you say that the statutory sort of guidance for the committee remains, but the name has changed. So can you just set out a bit more clearly again what the committee actually will be sort of advising on, and what are we tackling?
Yes, I haven't got the terms of reference with me now, so I may come back to you if I get any of this slightly wrong, but the main purpose of the committee is to advise Ofcom on carrying out our functions as they relate to mis and disinformation, and in particular the interaction between mis and disinformation and the harms that we regulate. It's their job to advise us on the use of our transparency powers, which we'll be starting to roll out later in the summer. And of course they'll pay particular interest to the types of harm described in the Act that are relevant to mis and disinformation. So, for example, the foreign interference offence, which is a priority offence under the Act. It doesn't always have to be mis and disinformation. That's a good example of an area where, in fact, accurate information can be distorted in ways which, or used by foreign actors in order to cause dissent or to interfere in political processes. So that's a good example of an area where they'll be advising us on the nature of the threats that we're facing and what we can do about them.
Thank you. Just on section 179, which we referenced earlier on in the committee session today, making it an offence to knowingly send false information intended to cause harm. Ofcom has not provided clarity on how to apply that section 179. So how is the advisory committee going to advise you on section 179? First question.
So on that one, we've provided guidance in the illegal content judgments guidance document, which is a very, very long and detailed discussion of how companies should consider the offences that are captured by the Act. That will be the starting point for our guidance. I'll have to come back to you on whether we're planning to provide more guidance with specific reference to the Section 179 offence. I'm not sure of the answer to that now, but that will be the starting point for interpreting that. And of course, they'll also want to consider those cases that have been brought through the courts about applications of that offence to help understand how companies might think about identifying those offences in practice.
Okay. It feels like we've had evidence from some of the platforms that say that they just don't understand what you want from this section 179 and how they can abide by it. So clearly, you know, there's a real lack of clarity here. I'm not sure whether the committee will understand how to do it, but certainly the platforms are saying that they don't understand what you want from this. I mean, and also I'm a bit so concerned by your lack of closeness to some of these issues, given that these are some of the big issues that we're talking about and that comes up in the Online Safety Act, to be honest. So, you know, what clarity are you going to give to platforms around this in particular, so that they know what they're supposed to be doing?
Look, I think we need to be really clear here. It is not going to be easy for a company to identify when false communications have been sent with an intent to cause harm or not. We need to work with them to help them identify what those signals are. Of course, where there's case law, where it can be, where the courts have made a judgment about whether somebody's done that, there'll be things that we can learn from that. This is an area where we need to continue to monitor the case law and provide more guidance to companies as we can. I should say that the big focus for us right now, of course this is an important offence, but there are a great deal of areas where we think, John talked about being selective earlier, we think there are a great deal of areas where there's immediate need for urgent improvements to address some very serious offences, including child sexual exploitation and abuse, the grooming work that we talked about earlier. This area is an area where we're going to need to do more work. We're going to need to understand the case law better. I think it is going to take longer for us to bring that Section 179 offence really into the centre of platforms' attention. It's not to say it's not important, but we're in a phase of work where we're learning more about that offence rather than a phase of work where we can be very directive with firms about what we want them to do differently.
Thank you very much, Steve. And now, Alison.
Thank you. I'm wanting to talk about generative AI, but before I do, I'm a little bit concerned with some of the answers. You say you have the resources. I've never met a regulator yet who said they had the resources, so that surprised me. And I hear what you said about the struggles with with enforcement and how that can be very long. In your answers to Emily about do you have the powers to actually enact this, what do you say to the committee when the large platforms say that they don't think the Online Safety Act is going to really affect them in much? What's your response to that? Because they have indicated that.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's true. To take two examples, and Ms Darlington touched on this earlier, most children today online have an experience which is not distinguishable from the experience that most adults have, because platforms don't systematically consider which of their users are children and put in place an appropriate experience for them.
They do.
That has to change.
That's the problem. They do.
They do. That's why they drive the data.
That's why they drive stuff to them.
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, the point I was making was from a safety point of view. Yes, it's not a different experience.
That's not the point. That's not the concern of the committee.
The ability of the services to use the insight that they have and the tools that are available now to identify which users are children and to shield from them content that's inappropriate for children, those capabilities exist. They have them themselves. They're readily available in some cases in the market. They're not being used. That has to change. We have very clear powers that enable us to do that. And that's going to be a big focus of our work. We've only just finalised the Protection of Children codes. They're passing through Parliament at the moment. We will be eagerly anticipating reading their risk assessments as regards children's safety when they send them to us by the end of July. And we will be laser focused in our work with those firms to ensure that they're transforming the experience of children online.
That's a little bit of a more reassuring answer, so thank you for that. With regards to generative AI, the whole Online Safety Act has taken about 10 years when it finally all gets done, all the guidelines are out, and of course generative AI appeared dramatically in the last few years, and we have the follow-on agentic AI as well. So, Mark, how is Ofcom responding to the challenges that generative AI presents the government's online safety regime?
Yeah, well, just let me take the opportunity to empathise briefly with your point about the length of time it's taken to get here. I mean, I've been working in this area since 2016, and I'm very sympathetic to concerns about the extended period since this legislation was first mooted. On Gen AI, I mean, the first thing to say is that Gen AI content that meets the definitions of illegal content or content that's harmful to children is treated in the Act exactly the same way as any other type of content. The Act is deliberately drawn in a way that's technology neutral. Sadly, we do see the use of generative AI to create harmful content, including images of children. That content is illegal. We work closely with law enforcement and with partners in the Internet Watch Foundation who are trying to develop tools to this. We're going to expect companies to put in place better tools for the detection of automatically generated material where it constitutes an offence or is harmful. There are areas of technology where we think the legal position is not entirely clear or it's complex. So, for example, chatbots and the sort of character services that we've seen linked with harm in the last few months, we think they're caught by the Act in some circumstances, but not necessarily all circumstances. The mere fact of chatting with a chatbot is probably not a form of interaction which is captured by the Act. So there will be things there that we'll want to continue to monitor. We'll want to talk to industry about those things where we think that there's more that could be done. We'll be very happy to work with government and Parliament to try to build on the legislation that's already in place.
Thank you. Do Ofcom and ICO have the powers that you need to investigate the data being behind generative AI, seeing that it's not mentioned? On the
We
specific...
want more for you in the first place, Sir John, isn't it?
Thank you. I believe we do. We have authority, we have jurisdiction over any processing that involves personal data. Most of the generative AI products that we've seen do. We took action in respect of Snapchat's deployment of a chatbot on its platform because it appeared to us at that time that they had not taken sufficient steps to assess the potential impact. They were able to satisfy us that they had. To your earlier point about the powers that we have the ability to issue fines. We issued a fine of £17 million to TikTok for enrolling or allowing children under 13 to sign up without parental consent. We have the ability to issue enforcement notices so that we can force an organisation to come into compliance. We have the ability to force deletion of data. On your point about generative AI, this is something that we've been working on for quite some time. Last year we issued a series of discussion papers setting out some of the challenges of applying our general data protection principles to generative AI models, and we concluded that in a statement in a paper at the end of last year. So that's there for the market to see. We are working at all points of the supply chain for generative AI, and the government has advised that when the Data Use and Access Bill is passed, it will be inviting the ICO to issue a code of practice for AI, which will set out some more granular regulation in respect of some of those deployments.
Okay, final very quick question. Do you... one example was when there was a deep fake of Joe Biden ringing people up, telling them not to vote. So that's one example. Do you feel that you need to broaden your engagement with other regulators because not all of these harms are identified within the Act, and you need to sort of broaden that list of harms?
Should I take that? I think that's a very important point. From my perspective as the ICO, we have a kind of blanket application where where personal information is implicated, and that's an example where, for example, the personal information of an individual has been manipulated in a way which could be deemed unfair. That does fit within our jurisdiction, but does that make the ICO the appropriate regulator to take action on that? We are not able to act preemptively and to prevent the dissemination of that, for example. If the person who created that content was an individual doing it in their personal capacity, that would be a real challenge to our jurisdiction. It's likely that they would not fall within our jurisdiction.
Would you liaise with the Electoral Commission, for example?
We would, and we had these conversations before last year's general election. We do have a body called the Digital Regulators Cooperation Forum, which has been really important in bringing the Ofcom and the ICO, as well as the Competition and Markets Authority and the Financial Conduct Authority together, to have an ability to identify and pass around these issues as we see who's the most, who's best placed to address them. That entity does not have a fixed membership. We have the capacity to bring in others, and it's likely that for some of these questions we would need to engage with the Electoral Commission, with Intellectual Property, MHRC, with a number of others.
Thank you very much, Alison. Now, we're officially sort of out of time, but we still have a lot that we want to get through, so I'm going to suggest we go on for a few more minutes, and I know particularly Tom and Paul have questions that they want to put. I do just want to confirm with you, Mark Bunting, that large language models, ChatGPT, etc., they are not defined in any of the categories of systems that Ofcom, the Online Safety Act, has a responsibility to regulate.
That's correct. The output of those models would be captured where it's shared.
But the actual themselves is not, which seems to be a large gap. Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the generative AI is a really interesting point. Obviously, things in the area are moving really quick and there's a fast pace and for development. So I wondered if you thought that Ofcom and the ICO respectively not only have the powers, as was asked, but have the flexibility and the capacity to keep up with emerging risks and technologies, and how are your organisations trying to stay ahead of the curve rather than just reacting?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an area where the cooperation between us and other regulators is extremely important. We all have our own teams working on these topics. They're regularly in touch. We have an AI and digital hub, which is all for regulators working together to provide support, particularly to smaller businesses that are trying to understand the implications of innovation and new technology. I think from a purely Ofcom perspective, the advantage of the Online Safety Act is that it is technology neutral. It does give us the scope to look at these new tools and understand what forms of content may be created. It's not going to cover every form of harm that might emerge with new technologies, I think is probably the key point that we touched on here. It is specifically designed for those contexts where content is being shared between users of a service. Within that area, yes, I think we're confident. Of course, we're tracking the development of new technologies, and we're working closely with partners like the Alan Turing Institute and others to keep abreast of new developments there. I think I suppose the point that I would make is that we have to be embedded in a broader ecosystem of change here. We're not going to be the people who are always coming up with the ideas for new solutions to harms, but we have to be plugged into the expert bodies who are doing that work, and that's what we're trying to do.
Do you feel you've got the resource and the capacity to do that with the scale and pace?
At present we do, but it's an area that we do keep under review, and of course it's an issue for Ofcom as a whole, because this is not just about online safety. These trends are also having impact on our broadcasting work and in our telecoms work. It's an area that we keep under review, where we think we need additional resource or to be using our resource differently, then that's a conversation that we'll have with government.
Thank you. Great. Thanks very much, Tom. Paul?
Hi, thanks for coming, both of you. We just referenced the idea of regulators cooperating. I assume you're both taking specific actions to increase your communication and collaboration with other regulators, like the Electoral Commission. I take that's ongoing, is it? Can you just give us a brief overview of where you are in terms of contact with other regulators?
Yeah, shall I kick off, and John will want to comment as well. There's a very wide range of bodies that we work closely with. The DRCF regulators, John's already mentioned. Another particularly important area of alignment for us is law enforcement, of course. Slightly different, but very, very important set of partners, particularly the National Crime Agency. We talked briefly earlier about international cooperation. That's probably the third area that I would say is most important for us at this stage. This year I'm chairing the Global Online Safety Regulators Network, which has members from around the world, Australia, Canada, EU member states, Asian regulators, and that is an extremely important forum for us in sharing intelligence about what we see in the market and to be learning, as we all are, about how to regulate effectively in this new area.
John?
Similarly, we have bilateral engagements with a number of other regulators, including the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the medical regulator, the Parliamentary Health and Safety Ombudsman, and others. But also, like Mark, we have a considerable engagement with international colleagues. So I was in the US last week and meeting with the Federal Trade Commission, talking on areas of common interest. We meet with G7 data protection regulators on a regular cycle that coincides with the ministerial G7 meetings. There are a number of other networks that we participate in to achieve what I think Mr. Gordon was describing there with the horizon scanning, making sure we are aware of what's coming over the horizon and ready for it.
And you just mentioned the National Crime Agency, Mr. Bunting. They've got particular concerns about end-to-end encryption in messaging, Facebook messaging in particular. Most of the references that they receive from child sex abuse online was from Facebook messaging, and they're expecting an 80% drop in that now due to end-to-end encryption. What are you doing to combat that challenge, both of you? Because obviously it's an Ofcom issue, but it's very much a data issue.
Well, we have identified encryption as one of the areas of risk that companies have to take account of. It is a problem. There's no getting away from it. I mean, encryption provides enormous benefits in terms of privacy and security to users, and of course it's very highly valued by users for that. But it does mean that a lot of the tools that we want to see companies use, including the AI detection tools that I talked about earlier, aren't operable in encrypted environments. Look, we think it's a challenge for the industry. We have been clear that we're expecting industry to do more work on techniques that are being developed to detect harmful activity in encrypted environments. Some of those are widely used already. For example, analysis of the metadata in encrypted services can give clues to the potential abuse of those services by criminals and people who want to inflict harm. But we don't think those are good enough, and we are looking to industry to do more. It is a point where the industry is still at a relatively early stage of technical development. It's not something that I think has been prioritised, and of course the very well-founded concerns about the risks of undermining encryption or creating backdoors into encrypted systems. So, complex issues, we're very focused on that. I mentioned our technology team earlier. It's one of the priority areas of work for them. It is going to be an area where I think more needs to be done, and it will take time.
John, doesn't it make your job almost impossible if there's end-to-end encryption on a lot of the data?
No, I don't believe so. No, I mean, encryption is essential for maintaining the security of the digital ecosystem. There is a raging debate on the extent to which limited access can be given for law enforcement purposes without fundamentally undermining the efficacy of that encryption. That debate will be played out in part in the Investigatory Powers Tribunal with reported litigation between Apple and the UK government in respect of orders that are said to have been presented to Apple to require opening of a certain encrypted product offering that they have. So these are very, very contemporary and contested issues at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. We are out of time, as I said, but we have 3 subjects which we want to cover very quickly. Emily is going to talk as quickly on small platforms, and I'll finish on advertising and the Data Use Act Bill.
Yeah, it leads very nicely from what you've just said about encryption. It's what we've heard in terms of the riots this summer is a lot of the organising and spreading and targeting happened on these smaller platforms. You've set up a small high harms platform task force. How many people sit on that task force? Has it met? And how often do you expect it to meet? And what levels of engagement do you think you'll have from 4chan, 8chan, Telegram, Signal, where a lot of this far-right extremist activity is moving?
Yeah, it's a really important area for us. I don't have the numbers for people on the task force right now, but I can come back to you about that. It's an active unit within the organisation as part of our supervision team. We've brought enforcement action already, as you'll be aware, against a forum that is focused on suicide content and that we believe it poses a significant risk of illegal suicide content and suicide content that's harmful to children. So that task force is already working in those areas. Look, this is an outcome that we want to achieve, but the other thing that we've seen is some of those organisations deciding to withdraw their service from the UK because they don't want to take the basic safety steps that we've put in mind. And of course, while we would rather services were safe and were being used in the UK, if that's an outcome, then that is an outcome which is available to firms under the Act. So some of the services that you mentioned there are not currently available in the UK. And we'll be monitoring that very closely to ensure that we are taking action on services that are still available but are not putting in place the protections that we require.
Thank you very much. 2 brief questions to finish with, hopefully brief. Mark, we heard a lot, the committee has heard a lot about the role of advertising in driving misinformation and how aspects of the Southport riots, the misinformation which drove that was actually monetized by various social media platforms, the huge domination of Google, both in the front end and back end of advertising. It is our understanding, or my view, that right now Ofcom's purchase on advertising regulation is purely on content and not on the process. Is that the case? And who is responsible, in your view, for regulating the process of advertising, which is helping to drive misinformation?
I'm not sure that's a brief question, but let me try and give you a brief answer. A brief answer, yeah. So, in the online safety work, Ofcom's particular focus is on fraudulent advertising, and we do have powers there to bring forward a code of practice, including on the content of fraudulent advertising as well as the process. I know both the ICO and the CMA have done work on the advertising business model historically. Our main intersection with it outside fraudulent advertising is the role that advertising plays in driving firms to maximise engagement with content, and the role of recommenders in maximising engagement. And our primary focus is on ensuring that those recommenders are not being abused to disseminate harmful and illegal material, as we touched on earlier. So that's the limit of our role on advertising.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And John, the Data Use and Access Bill is coming back to the House of Commons next week. In it, it contains a clause which allows for the reuse of private data without express consent in the case of scientific research, without a definition of scientific research in the bill. I know that your guidance for existing legislation uses the Fascati definition of scientific research for the existing legislation. Are you concerned that this clause will allow, for example, private data to be used without consent for research which is not being defined as scientific, and how can we avoid that?
No, I'm not concerned. I think research is a term which warrants its normal, natural meaning, which is fairly broad, that involves deriving new knowledge from existing information. Where I would have a concern would be if such an accommodation was exploited in a way which enabled actions to be taken in respect of individuals, so targeting them, profiling them, taking law enforcement action against them, or in some way investigating them. Research should be at an aggregate and anonymised level, even if identifiable information is involved. The outputs should always be anonymised. So within those parameters, I'm pretty comfortable with the Bill's proposals.
You're certain that personal data could not be used, for example, to train large language models with this as a loophole to allow it?
I missed the last part of the question.
It couldn't be used to train large language models, for example?
It could, in some circumstances it could, provided there were safeguards taken. And there's a lot of work going on at the moment about the use of synthetic data in training large language models and the like, and a number of privacy-enhancing technologies that can be used to get the benefit of large scientific databases that include and incorporate personal data without compromising that data. And that's where we want to see that responsible innovation.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll have to leave it there. That's been fascinating. Thank you so much both to Mark Bunting of Ofcom and John Edwards of the ICO for being with us today. Order. order. And welcome to this, the Science, Innovation and Technology Select Committee's second panel today, where we are fortunate to be joined by Baroness Jones, the Minister, and by Talitha Rowland. I am very pleased to welcome you, and thank you very much. The committee is very pleased to welcome you, and thank you very much for joining us today. We have a lot to get through, so I'm going to go straight to a question which is, I think, in a lot of people's minds and has been reflected in a lot of discussion. Would you, Minister, put on the record that the Online Safety Act will not be subject to negotiation as part of any UK-US trade deal?
Well, I'm very pleased to be able to say that that is the case, that the Prime Minister has made it absolutely clear that the Online Safety Act is not up for negotiation. It's not part of the trade deal discussions. We've made that clear. And the fact is that the Online Safety Act is a piece of legislation. It can't just be negotiated away. As you know, you would have heard from Ofcom today, it's well through the process of being implemented, so it can't be changed, and we're happy to reassure everybody that we are sticking with the Online Safety Act.
Thank you very much, Baroness Jones. I think a lot of people will be reassured by that response. But it does also equally raise a question of how much, and this is, can the UK do to tackle online harms without support from the United States?
So, obviously, we want to work internationally, globally. The Online Safety Act is, a global first in many ways. Lots of other countries are watching us implementing it with interest. But it is a UK-focused piece of legislation. The legislation, all companies, wherever they're based, need to apply within the UK to our UK laws. The Online Safety Act makes that absolutely clear. We are having Ofcom and ourselves obviously have regular discussions with companies that post platforms in the UK, but they are expected, wherever they come from, to comply with the legislation, and whoever they are, whatever company they are, that is the case. And as you know, Ofcom have all sorts of tools in their toolkit to take action, including fines, including taking the post down and so on, if needs be. But obviously we don't want to come to that, and we're happy to be part of those continuing negotiations with those companies.
Thank you very much, Baroness Jones. Kit,
Thanks very much. So the Online Safety Act might not be up for negotiation, but it might be up for sandpapering. I mean, in your interactions with Number 10, which naturally there will be, has there been any suggestion about sort of toning it down or taking it easy, or let's not push it too hard? I mean, there are ministerial judgments to be made, both in the operation of the Act, the guidelines, the interaction with regulators. Has there been any sense that there's been an attempt to tone it down? I mean, for example, we've already seen, I'm not saying it's necessarily true, but there were accusations that following hospitality from YouTube at Glastonbury, Labour Party policy was changed with regard to the digital services tax, for example, right? So, have you picked up any sense of that from Number 10 at all?
I would say quite the opposite, that our engagement with Number 10 has made it absolutely clear that this is a priority for the Prime Minister. He is absolutely determined to drive this through, particularly with regard to child safety, child protection. He's already had meetings with the bereaved families. He is absolutely committed to doing everything that we can to protect those children, not only from future harm, but to make sure that they have a healthy childhood, which is what all of us want to aspire to. So we're looking. The discussions that we're having with Number 10 are how can we take it forward, how can we make sure that every child has a healthy, engaged childhood and protected from harm, and that is really where we're at. We're not into, I think you used this expression, sandpapering. We're not into sandpapering the Act, and there's no pressure to do that.
Yeah, but there's an interpretation of some words in there that could be used. So, for example, harm. Right? What is harmful to my child, other parents may not agree is necessarily harmful, and certainly social media companies wouldn't think was necessarily harmful. in your interaction with those companies, have they made a case to you against anything that you were planning to do? And have you changed it as a result?
So a lot of the implementation of the Act, of course, comes down to Ofcom's interpretation rather than any interpretation that we base on this. At the moment, all of our evidence, all our engagement, my understanding, all Ofcom's engagement with the social media platforms is that they understand the requirements of the legislation and they are working with us to implement it. So I haven't picked up that there is any suggestion or any request that it be watered down. And it's hard to know how you would do that in practical terms, to be honest.
Let's, thank you very much, Kit. Let's take a look at that a bit more detail, perhaps, with Steve.
Thank you. Ofcom, in the context of the violence disorder last summer, following the murders of the girls in Southport, said that there was a clear connection between online activity and violence in the streets. We know on LinkedIn, X, TikTok, misinformation, disinformation, incitement. The tech platforms have told us that even if the Online Safety Act was fully enacted at the time, it wouldn't have changed the response to that violence and disorder. What does that tell us about the Online Safety Act, do you think?
All I would say, of course, was that the Online Safety Act wasn't in place for much of the provision, and it wasn't in place last summer. But we're confident that the illegal aspects of it, the child code aspects of it, would have made a real difference, and that the platforms would have been required to take those posts down in those circumstances. And indeed, Ofcom wrote to the Secretary of State about Southport, and she said, "I'm confident that had the draft codes been in force at that time, they would have provided a firm base for urgent engagement with services on steps they were taking to protect UK users from harm." So Ofcom shared our view, which is that had those codes been in place, it would have made a material difference.
And in what way would it have made a material difference then in that case? So what would have happened differently if the Online Safety Act had been in place?
Well, obviously, the most obvious thing is to do with the illegal code, illegal harm. So they would have, where posts were illegal, then Ofcom would have had the opportunity to, or insist that those posts were taken down under the code. There would have been a requirement to do that. So that's the most obvious example.
Lots of the content wouldn't necessarily have been illegal, though, would it? So disinformation, misinformation, incitement to go and join protests, but not necessarily to be violently sort of protesting. Where is the line, as you see it, that where last summer would have been dealt with differently when you use the word illegal specifically?
So what I would say about last summer was that the codes and the Online Safety Act was only one part of the equation. So we were doing work within the department, we were working with the Home Office, a lot of, and you'll of course appreciate this, a lot of the things that were posted were then repeated in real time physically. So it wasn't just about messages that people were seeing online, it was things that were happening offline in real time as well. So the important point there was about the liaison with the Home Office, making sure that the messages that we were receiving, and sometimes we were picking up new trends or new demands or new messages on the online platforms, which were then materialising in communities a few days later. So some of that liaison was absolutely essential to us. So tackling misinformation of the kind that happened in Southport requires more than just one piece of legislation. It requires a whole community campaign and involvement to tackle it.
The main piece of disinformation, I suppose, was around the attacker claiming that he was an asylum seeker, came over on a boat, gave a false name. That was essentially what drove quite a lot of the activity. Would that have been considered to be illegal to have posted that, and would there be different activity by the social platforms enabled by the Online Safety Act if that were to happen this year?
Well, there's a couple. I mean, I think we've got some lessons to learn about what happened in Southport, and of course, the Prime Minister has launched a public inquiry into it. Ofcom can only act on illegal posts when they know for sure it's illegal. I think the Law Commission are doing a piece of work on this as well. So we've got lessons to learn about what happened in Southport, but obviously Ofcom have to be confident that something is illegal before they can intervene.
So I think, Minister, you're saying that the Online Safety Act does not address misinformation, given where it is not illegal content. I mean, that was part of the evidence that we heard from Ofcom just now, who basically said that it did not address misinformation.
I think if it happened now, the illegal harms element of it would apply now. They didn't apply last summer, so I think that is the material difference.
The misinformation part, which is not illegal, is not impacted by the Online Safety Act.
Our interpretation of the Act is misinformation, disinformation is covered under the Illegal Harms Code and the Children's Code.
I think perhaps one of the challenges of this area is mis and disinformation isn't one thing. It can sometimes be illegal. It can be, foreign interference. It can be content that sort of incites hate or violence. That's clearly illegal. It can also be below the illegal threshold, but nevertheless be harmful to children. That is captured, and it's also captured by many of the largest services to own terms of service, which the categorised duties will require them to sort of enforce consistently. So I think it comes back to your point, the saying around platforms told you that they wouldn't have necessarily done anything different. That at the moment is them marking their own homework. They will have to account to Ofcom as to whether they are actually doing those things, not be able to make that assessment and judgment for themselves, and Ofcom may come to a different view.
But I suppose, Chair, I think the problem here identified is that Ofcom doesn't necessarily think that. I don't know whether that was your interpretation.
That was my interpretation. And certainly, Ms. Rowland, they said basically that given that there are no duties to act for Ofcom with regard, there are no duties set out by Ofcom to act with regard to misinformation, even if they have codes which do talk about misinformation, or even if they identify them as risks, they will have no duty to act to be compliant. And that seems to be a key issue.
Thank you. Should the Online Safety Act have a crisis response mechanism to compel social media platforms to take certain steps on harmful content during crises? And so it'd be interesting to know what happens now, and what you think should happen, and what some of those lessons to be learned might be.
The short answer to that, I think, is yes, and I know that Ofcom are working on a crisis management protocol now, partly from the learnings that they had last summer. Incidents like that undoubtedly will happen again. So yes, Ofcom are working on that. We very much support that. We need to be able to work quickly on cases such as the riots last summer. So anything that we can do that gives us that more immediate reaction is very much to be welcomed, and we're encouraging Ofcom to do that.
And in your interactions as a department with the platforms, do you have a sense that there are certain platforms that want to participate in that and certain platforms that don't, or is it generally, is there a general pushback against this? What's your...
I haven't heard any of the platforms say that they don't want to be helpful in times like the riots last summer. That's not a narrative that I recognise. They have been broadly supportive, and they were broadly supportive last summer. When we were asking them, when we were identifying that there were new trends coming, a new misinformation, disinformation appearing. By and large, they were very responsive in taking it down. So we had a good relationship with them on that last summer.
Can I just ask one further question, Chair? Do you mind? Where does the analysis and monitoring of misinformation, disinformation online, when it pertains to the UK, where does that sit within government, and who has overall responsibility for it?
So we have a unit in DCIT, the NSOT, the National Security Online Information Team, that monitors what's happening across the piece online. So they identify trends. They don't identify individuals, but they can identify trends before the impact of any of those trends are seen more publicly. But obviously they're working in close harmony with the Home Office. So that's what we saw last summer, was that liaison was absolutely important. And I think the National Security Services as well were part of that. I don't really see...
You named three, and I know that there's at least a fourth, which is the Cabinet Office. So who's in charge?
In these kind of incidents that you would expect a kind of cross-government kind of response, so we have established systems and processes. So say it's around an election, there's the Defending Democracy Task Force that it plugs in. There are obviously sort of cross-government structures sort of in place during Southport. We will look at sort of slightly different angles of it, which is why it's important that it all comes together. But as you say, the kind of UK information environment and threats to sort of public safety and national security online are very specifically something that our team looks at.
Thank you. Now I know that a couple of our members have to leave early, so I'm going to actually come to Alison and then Emily quickly, and then go to Adam.
Thank you. It's quite interesting that you say that misinformation, disinformation is covered, because Ofcom have quite clearly stated that they felt it wasn't covered, and that is a gap.
Misinformation.
And which is interesting. But what certainly isn't covered is generative AI and deepfake imagery. So within that one, and particularly ones where issues where it could be between regulators, so faking a politician telling people to not vote. So is this a problem? And it seems that Ofcom have no powers to tackle the AI systems that create these deepfake imageries. Is this a problem? And if so, how do you intend to fix it?
Well, I mean, can I say first that we think the Online Safety Act does cover generative AI in a sense that the Act is designed to be future-facing, technology neutral, so it includes AI.
How does it do that?
Sorry?
How does it do that?
Well, in the sense that they can identify, and obviously it has to have the technology to be able to do that, but it can identify posts wherever they originate from. So, but of course they have to be up to speed with all of that, and they have technology support that will help them to do that.
Just to intervene here briefly, I think the issue is that whereas content generated by generative AI is covered, the service, which is ChatGPT, etc., are not covered because they are not one of the categories which is identified in the Online Services Act. So the processes, the risk assessment, the requirements which apply to services are not covered by the Online Safety Act.
Yes, yes. They have to qualify under the qualification elements of the Online Safety Act in order for that to apply. But a lot of the posts that you would see, which have been AI generated, are ones that then the way that they're shared, etc., they do qualify under the Act.
There are also a number of interactions with those definitions under the Act. So, and Ofcom set out an open letter at the end of last year setting this out. But, for example, where a service has a sort of sharing or forwarding functionality, that might not be on a social media platform, but actually that qualifies as a sort of user-to-user service in that respect. Similarly, a chatbot that produces pornographic content would be captured by that element of the regime. And similarly, where a service sort of searches one or more kind of websites. So it's not totally comprehensive, but the OSA does play a significant part, and it's not that those services are not captured at all.
So, we have heard proposals from civil society that in order to address misinformation online, that we should require platforms to carry out risk assessments, which I believe have been mentioned, reporting and de-amplification. And what is your view on this, the requirement that we have, they do this?
Are you saying that specifically to do with AI-generated material or all material?
Just misinformation in general, but it would be useful to keep that AI imagery, deep fakes in mind as well.
So the risk assessment is the absolutely fundamental heart of the Online Safety Act. So all of the companies that fall within the remit of the Act are required to carry out those risk assessments and to act on it. That's something that Ofcom will be overseeing as the Act rolls out. So that's an absolutely essential part of it.
The act of de-amplification, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, when it's identified.
Yes, exactly. That's the one of the main provisions of the Act is that they have to have steps in place where they see potential harms, that they act on them. And the words that are in the Act, and we try to amplify as well, is safety by design. So they need to build that design in at the heart of their provisions of their platforms, rather than taking down material after the event, which is never the same effect.
Final question. Do you feel that the regulators have the required resources and flexibility to respond to this very fast-changing technical world? And do you feel a need to address where certain issues and harms can fall between the gaps between regulators and to improve their cross-working?
Firstly, about Ofcom and the resources, yes, we do think that they have enough resources. They have 550 staff now working full-time on making sure that the Act is implemented effectively. They've never said to us that they don't have the resources to do it. They have a significant budget, and obviously we're liaising with them because this is a top priority for the government. So, if they feel they haven't got the support, we would certainly make sure that we would step up and help that. In terms of the regulators, you're right that there's more than one regulator. We're very acutely aware of that. And part of government's role is to make sure that we try and streamline some of that so that information doesn't fall between the gaps. There is a job to be done there. Whether it's the ICO or the IPO or indeed the AI Security Institute, all of those, we have a job to do to make sure that we coordinate that effectively.
Thank you very much. Alison. Just to say that in the previous panel we did hear that safety by design as well as other measures did not apply to misinformation because they were applied to illegal content, and misinformation is not defined as illegal content. So better to bear in mind that the role of misinformation here. Emily.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Baroness Jones. I wanted to talk about the weakening of some of the terms of service, in particular X and Meta. And in particular, there's some real-world examples that they have published or have published and leaked. So some of the stronger terms of service that we heard before from Meta, they are now saying are up for debate. And I wanted to get your views on how the UK government perceives these statements and what you think Ofcom should be doing with the powers that they currently have. So under leaked guidance, they say, immigrants are grubby, filthy pieces of shit. Trans people are not real, they are mentally ill. Black people are more violent than whites, and Jews are far greedier than Christians. When I put that to the Meta representative, he very much said these statements are up for debate. Do you think these statements are up for debate, or do you think that that the terms of service, that the degradation of the terms of service of X and Meta are in conflict with our Online Safety Act?
So firstly, as I think I said earlier, all companies that produce materials in the UK have to comply with the Online Safety Act. All different codes apply to them. But we take freedom of speech extremely seriously. That's also part of the Act, that people have the right to free expression. But it doesn't include the right to spread malicious or illegal information. And we have other bits of legislation in the UK as well in terms of threat, racism and so on. So all of those issues apply in the UK, regardless of whichever company these companies come from.
So what actions would you expect Ofcom to take then? In this context, with the current powers they have?
Well, it will fall under the control of the Act, and so it comes back to, Ofcom will require those companies to take the proper risk assessments and to make sure that they are taking action against illegal postings when they are seen to appear on their platforms.
So it's illegal.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is, in their terms of service, they've said this is applicable. Okay. You've rightly said we have free speech in this country. We're very proud of that, but we also have protections against people in statements. Therefore, some of these statements, I'm not a lawyer, but they may or may not fall on either side of that. What would you expect Ofcom to actually do when you've got terms of service that may be in conflict with our Online Safety Act? What would you actually expect them to do? That's what
Well, then I would say that the Act overrides whatever the terms of service says. So, so their requirement to comply with the law in the UK takes precedent.
Right. So they should be reviewing the terms of service of these platforms.
That's my interpretation of what the Act says, yes.
Just the second question, which was about the size question. We spend a lot of time talking about the big ones that most of us know very well, but in fact what we've seen through our inquiry is the actions of the small ones, being the small platforms, the telegrams, the signals, where a lot of the activity of organising the riots happened, the targeting of the riots, as well as the spreading of misinformation. Do you think there's enough focus in the Act on those small platforms? And do you think we need to tighten up regulations around them?
All of those companies are expected to comply. So again, going back to the codes, whatever their size, the illegal harms to children's code, for example, any other actions that Ofcom bring in or put in place further down the line, they will be expected to comply with that. And Ofcom clearly will have to have relationships with them to make sure that they're doing the risk assessments and all the other steps that are necessary as the Act is rolled out.
And have you met them? Do you think they would? Have you met Telegram and Signal? And do you think they understand the Online Safety Act?
I haven't personally met them, but I'm assured that Ofcom are in touch with them, and I'm sure I don't think that they can just ignore the Act. I don't think that is possible.
Just to add to what the Minister said, the Secretary of State, and we've been clear on this in our draft statement of strategic priorities as well, is really concerned, as you say, about kind of small but risky sites. They do present a real kind of danger to UK citizens, and that is part of the reason it's in that set of priorities from the government to Ofcom. We've been pleased to see that they've responded by setting up a dedicated supervisory task force, but that's an area that we'll want to keep in touch with them on really closely.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to bring Paul in briefly.
Follow up on Emily. Minister, thanks for a bit more clarity on terms of service. But we were concerned when we heard Meta tell us in evidence that the kind of thing they'll now allow, thanks to their weakened terms of service on Facebook, are trans people aren't real, they are mentally ill, which is factually incorrect. Black people are more violent than whites, which is factually incorrect. Jews are flat out greedier than Christians, which is factually incorrect. Surely we're not accepting those as terms of a debate in freedom of speech terms, are we? We're accepting that those are lies, and given that they are lies, do you think the government should set a minimum terms of service for each of them, for these providers, through Ofcom?
Well, the Act at the moment concentrates on what's illegal, and obviously the children's codes. So that's our focus at the moment. You'll know that there was a debate when the Act was going through about the kind of legal but harmful aspects of it. So at the moment, the Act doesn't cover that.
Your earlier answers seem to accept that those untruths, if they're spread and they are in many senses spreading hate crime or even non-hate crime incidents, that it's the duty under the Act for Ofcom to maybe investigate.
I think once it becomes illegal, which hate crime, misogynistic posts and so on would affect, in the end, become, falls into the illegal harms, and Ofcom would be expected to take action against them.
It's illegal. Okay, thank you very much. We'll go back. Thank you very much. We'll go back to Adam now. If that's
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thank you both, and good morning. I'm keen to talk about scientific researchers within the context of the conversation we're having today. And I want to move on to look at the Data Use and Access Bill, which is coming towards completion in the Commons at the moment. How much access to social media platforms will the Data Use and Access Bill provide to independent scientific researchers? And what do you foresee that access enabling for those researchers?
So you're right. We're very pleased that is in the data bill that's just going through Parliament at the moment. If I remember rightly, we've said that we will carry out a consultation on this, and the Secretary of State will issue guidance eventually. But we are keen that we have more researchers looking at having access to the social media sites and carrying out research that's effectively in the public interest, because we all want to know the impact that some of this material is having in the public domain.
Okay, sure. So, given that and the fact that traditionally social media sites have been quite opaque with respect to making this information freely available, do you accept that, given the opaque nature of the platforms, policy making in this space, and specifically in regards to algorithms, recommender algorithms, has traditionally lacked an evidence base?
Well, absolutely, and the government themselves are carrying out research on some of these aspects, because Ofcom have said, and we have certainly said, that we want all our policy making to be evidence-based going forward. So we have a piece of research happening with Cambridge academics at the moment, looking at some of the impact on children. But yes, absolutely, we want it to be an evidence-based policy going forward. So the involvement that researchers can have in terms of that aspect of looking at online issues will feed into that, and we're very much looking forward to it.
And do you feel that the provisions in the data bill are going to facilitate it being more evidence-based in the future?
Yeah, I mean I think that's the intention of it, and that was the debate that we had around that aspect in the data bill, was very much that was the focus of it, and that's what we hope to achieve.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to turn to sort of fact-checking and crowdsourcing. So, obviously, there are a number of websites out there, like Full Fact and others, that sort of compile and do these sort of things. I wondered what's the most effective approach of tackling misleading content online? Is it the third-party fact-checkers? Is it crowdsourcing provision? Is it content notes? Or is it a combination of all of those? And how do we make sure that's robust when you have political parties like the Conservatives changing their page to say it's, Fact Check UK or whatever in the context of election campaigns?
So, obviously, this goes back to having the evidence-based information, So basically, we are looking at the impact of these different mechanisms for doing fact-checking, crowdsourcing, and so on. So we don't have a fixed view on this. We're looking at the evidence. We're collecting evidence on it, and obviously we want the best information that we can possibly receive to make sure that users are given that information about what is safe and what isn't safe in terms of accessing information online.
Should Ofcom have a priority for or issue guidance when it comes to the best way in which to check content online?
I'm not sure if Ofcom are carrying out any research into this, but obviously we will look at. I'm assuming that Ofcom and us will look at the best available evidence on this, and I don't think we don't have a fixed view on it at the moment. We genuinely want it to be the most accurate information that is available. So we will gather the information and draw a conclusion on this hopefully very soon.
It's
a really interesting question, and I think the evidence we've seen so far is quite mixed. So there is some evidence that, say, the community sort of note style, has some advantages, and that, it can sometimes act quicker, it can sometimes draw on kind of local knowledge, and there are certain sort of sectors of the population who perhaps are more sort of inclined to trust those sources, perhaps where trust in sort of the state or sort of authorities is perhaps lower. That said, obviously there are some really established sort of third-party fact-checkers that have done work for a really kind of long period of time, and we can kind of evidence the results of those. So I think it's not necessarily a straightforward, X is definitely always going to be better than Y. As you say, it may well be that a kind of mix or a combination, but understanding the evidence. On your question on Ofcom, one thing the Online Safety Act did do is give an enhanced media literacy duty, and that has to work in partnership, I think, with our work there, Ofcom's work there, and also, those getting those authoritative voices out there, which, as you've noted, was a problem during Southport.
Two quick follow-ups on that then. Yes, it is the case that the fact checkers, their approach, their process is quite transparent. We understand what they're doing. When it comes to community notes, we were not able to get detail on the algorithms used to mediate, if you like, community notes by X. Are you aware of them, and are you investigating them?
So I think that's one of the areas where, we've talked about the benefit of kind of research and independent research. Is actually that is an area where we're really keen to understand what the evidence is telling us.
That's something that you're looking into. Yeah. And with regard to media literacy, I was struck by the fact that the media literacy strategy, there is no measure of successful media literacy in terms of measuring whether media literacy goes up or goes down, or etc. The measures of success are around citations and collaborations with local authorities. Do you think that there should be a measure of actual what media literacy is and whether it's going up?
Well, the work that we've done and some focused media literacy, I think, has been shown to be effective. But it's very much focused on individuals and small communities. And if you spend a lot of time talking to parents and children in communities, it can have an impact, and that's a measurable impact. The challenge we then have is rolling that out on a national basis, but right. That's only one part of our media literacy strategy. Obviously, the government are doing work on this, Ofcom are doing work on it, but the other side of it, which we've been very keen to work with, is with our colleagues in the Department for Education, because media literacy is part of the curriculum review, and we want to make sure that all young people, regardless of their where they live in the country, have access to proper media literacy training. It's part of digital skills, but it's also building that resilience for young people to understand the material that they're seeing, to be able to scrutinise it effectively. So that is part of the curriculum review, and that's very important. And the interim report from the Department for Education on the curriculum review also identifies that that's going to be an important part of their work going forward.
Thank you. Now let's move on to look at one of the advertising, because one of the aspects of the spread of misinformation, which has really struck the committee members, is advertising, and the role in which advertising plays both in financing and funding the big tech companies, where we think between 80 and 92% of their revenues come from advertising. So we definitely establish a dependency there, and the dominance of Google in the advertising process, as well as the fact that we effectively established that some of the misinformation around the Southport riots was actually monetized by the actors in this. So the digital advertising market has been described as complex and opaque with minimal human oversight, including, of course, the monetization of harmful content. So should the process of digital advertising be regulated by a government-funded body, in your view?
I mean, you're absolutely right that there is a complicated supply chain in terms of online advertising. This is a piece of work that's being carried out by our colleagues in DCMS. They have a working group which, in broad terms, is called the Online Advertising Task Force, which is being carried out by DCMS, that are looking at this whole issue and hopefully will come up with some recommendations in due course. So it may well be that we could write to you, or they could write to you and give you more information about that.
I think that would be appreciated, because I think our understanding was that little progress had been made in terms of setting out the objectives, or where we would, how long it would take, or where we would find something. So yes, if you could write to us about that, that would be helpful. But that brings into that raises the issue of where the government's focus is when it comes to regulating online safety. Now, we recognise that the Online Safety Bill, which, as we've heard, took many years to come about, and during that time it was under the previous government, not this government. But obviously, your responsibility is to ensure the safety of UK citizens. And so, I want to ask you about the focus only on content, because we heard from witnesses how looking at behaviour, looking at, for example, the bot networks, etc., looking at the processes underlying, looking at the commercial factors. And I do note also that the UK government, the government's Keeping Children Safe in Education has 4 elements: content, but also conduct, contact and commerce. Why is this government, or why is the Online Safety Act so focused on content? And do you think it should take steps to look at conduct, contact and commerce to address some of the challenges in the dissemination of misinformation?
So, from our perspective in DCIT, I think we are focused at the moment on content, but there is a wider government role in all of this. So it does go back to the different departments: Department for Education, MHCLG are doing work on community cohesion around this issue. So there is a lot of cross-government work going on these issues. And we are all in touch with each other. So it's not as though we're all working in silos. So we very much see this as a joint endeavour. But there is work going on in terms of future-proofing the Online Safety Act. The department are already looking at what next steps, if any, need to be taken. Our priority has always been to get the implementation of the Act up front first, and that's exactly what we're doing. But the Secretary of State has always said that if we need to take further steps, we will. And we are obviously mindful of all of that. If online harms continue to occur and the Act isn't addressing them in the way that we want them to, then obviously we will take further steps. But if we do, then our priority will very much be at children, because that's absolutely essential that we make sure that children have a happy and healthy childhood, and not one that's involves bullying or any other online harms.
Absolutely accept the importance of child safety online, and much of the Online Safety Act addresses that. But can you just confirm that when you're looking at misinformation, which we have agreed is not covered effectively by the Online Safety Act, you will be looking at issues such as bot networks, the way in which misinformation is spread virally amongst different actors, not all of whom are good actors, for example?
Well, we're keeping the implementation of the Online Safety Act under review, and if those issues arise as being really critical issues, then obviously we will look at ways that we need to address that.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. Tom, did you want to come in here?
It was just pushing a little bit further on, Matt. You said talking about updating the Online Safety Act to make sure it stays, up to date with advances. Just turning from bots and that now to sort of AI systems that generate things like deepfakes. The Online Safety Act makes no mention of harmful deepfake imagery in it. Is that a problem? If so, is that something that you might address? Will the government be bringing forward legislation specifically, more robustly to deal with that? And how will you ensure that any legislation and the Act Act captures and stays with the times? Because saying it will be updated is all good and well, but often it's that period of harm that will be caused while we catch up.
Yes. I mean, you're absolutely right that one of our challenges and one of Ofcom's challenges is to make sure that as technology moves along, and it moves, as we know, it moves at pace, that the protections that we're building in are up to date, and that's an absolute requirement of ours. So that's a priority for us. In terms of deepfakes, then we're already taking steps in the data bill. We've got some protection in the crime and justice bill that's coming forward. We're taking steps to protect people against deepfakes. So there is a whole lot of other work going on that, and we have DCIT have sponsored with the Home Office quite a useful piece of work, which will talking about technology being advanced, that where we can create technology that can identify deepfakes. So where deepfakes appear, the technology will identify them and can flag them up. So all of these things are in a very fast-moving world, but all of them will be effective in the long term, we hope.
Then how do you ensure that these regulators or authorities that have powers and responsibilities to do that are resourced to keep up to date with those challenges?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right that is the challenge, but for the time being, obviously, our responsibility is to make sure that Ofcom are carrying out their functions effectively in this area.
Thank you very much, Tom. Just one final question, and thank you so much for your patience, Minister, which builds on from the issues that Tom was raising, in as much as in misinformation, as we've heard, misinformation and disinformation have different characteristics. They have different characteristics. Counter disinformation is an important part of our national security. I raised with the Prime Minister at the Liaison Committee the extent to which we appear to be being hugely outspent by China and Russia when it comes to disinformation and responding with counter disinformation. So the previous government declined to place the counter disinformation unit, which is now called the National Security Online Information Team, change of name, but not a change of footing. So the previous government declined to place it on a statutory footing or make it accountable to Parliament. How will this government ensure that there is proper oversight?
So that work occurs in our department, and the ministers are always responsible for any actions that happen within the department. Yeah. So the simple answer to that is that the work of that unit is ultimately ministers will be answerable and responsible for the work it does. I suppose that's the simple answer to it.
Okay, so we will look forward to hearing more about work to address Russian bot networks and other elements of counter-disinformation.
I mean, you'll appreciate that some of the work, as with the Home Office, is, if it's a matter of national security, then we have to be quite sensitive about that. And obviously, some of these things can't be put in the public domain. The work of the National Security Online Information Team as I said earlier, it's just looking at general trends. So it's just looking at what happens across the piece in terms of social media. It's not identifying individuals. It can't require individuals to take posts down. So it's just looking at, it's an information service, if you like. It's not able to do much more than that.
If I could just build on the Minister's point, I think ironically actually the work of that team has been subject to a little bit of misinformation, and perhaps sort of calls for it to be put on a statutory basis have been based on a kind of misunderstanding of what it does. Some people have sort of questioned whether it's a sort of censorship unit. It's absolutely not. It, as the Minister says, it kind of monitors trends and narratives from open source data that is publicly available to everybody in an anonymised form. It also has no powers to require removal of content. Again, some people have suggested that that might be the case in the past. That's absolutely not the case.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I think in the information sort of wars, information is valuable, and open source information is valuable in our understanding of where we are with misinformation, disinformation, and counter disinformation. But I would just want to thank both of you very much for for joining us and for your evidence to us, and for answering or responding to our questions. And so thank you very much. Talitha Rowland as the Director of Security and Online Harms, and thank you particularly Baroness Jones as the Responsible Minister. Order.